This is Jeff Steitzer, and you're listening to the Xbox Expansion Pass. Double kill, triple kill, overkill, killing spree, killing frenzy, Kilimanjaro, kill-tacular, kill-pocalypse, slayer, brains.
Welcome one, welcome all to episode 153 of the Xbox Expansion Pass, recorded on Sunday, November 13th, 2022. I am your host, Luke Lore, the Insipid Ghost. In this episode, we are joined by the co-founder and creative lead for Lillimo Games, Colin Moriarty, to discuss art styles, the writing process, and how publishing on multiple platforms can glean insight into the differences between Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo. Gears of War is getting the film treatment, and Halo's winter update impresses quite a few fans. Enjoy. Yet another week of gaming is upon us and behind us. Welcome to XEP, discussing all things in the gamerverse as they pertain to the Xbox ecosystem. And as I am wont to do each and every week, I like to start the show by offering words of kindness to those who have made my gaming week better. And this week, I extend words of kindness to Dano, Smitty Smith, and everyone who's taken a moment to check out and comment the YouTube shorts over on XEP's YouTube channel. That's been kind of a new endeavor for me. I'm doing a couple elements of retooling slowly on the XEP side of things, taking it slow because I'm a solo show and I like to take my time as I adjust things, balancing work, professional, and hobby, et cetera, et cetera. But I started YouTube shorts and I'm really enjoying them. I'm working on getting some overlays if I want to use those at all. But I'm really enjoying making YouTube shorts, and I've seen comments, I've seen people checking them out. And it's a really good feel-good win. If I'm being honest, it's really appreciated to see people doing that. So I really appreciate those of you that have taken a moment to take a look at them, to offer feedback, to just comment. It's been kind of cool to just kind of be in that realm. I think I've made 3 at this point. One discussing the Gears of War news, another discussing the arrival of God of War Ragnarok's Collector's Edition, which I was really excited about, and then the most recent one discussing Kevin Conroy and the Arkham games, and that was kind of a heartfelt one. But it's been fun. And then my dog often likes to jump in when I work on content. She's getting pretty old now. I actually carry her upstairs and let her kind of hang out in the room with me. So sometimes she makes appearances, or you hear her fluff in the background. And I thought about not doing that as far as the show is concerned, because I know it's like a quality thing, but it's kind of nice to have those little moments of memory and inconvenience recorded, kind of just those like memories there. She's 14 and getting pretty gray. The eyes are getting white. And so I kind of want to have these on record, just little thoughts and moments of, there's my Fluffs doing what my Fluffs does. And she's looking over at me now when I say that. So there you go. What are you going to do? All right, guys, lots to talk about this week. Let's get into some news. One piece of content that I was really excited to read this week came out of Remedy Entertainment. They are officially working on Control 2, and they've signed an agreement with publisher 505 Games. Now, I'm stoked for this because I love Control. I love Alan Wake. I love a lot of what those games did. If you haven't played Control, I strongly recommend checking out the Ultimate Edition. It's usually on sale pretty regularly, and with Black Friday coming up, you'll have a chance to check it out. But I really, really love what they did with those games. Recommend, by the way, playing them on Series X, S, or PlayStation 5 because it's very much a next-gen game that was in that bridge. Kind of like, there's a lot of games that should have been now current-gen only. But, a lot of reasons why they cross-gen. Nonetheless, Control, fantastic game. I love it. Alan Wake Remastered, really enjoyed that experience as well. And to see Control 2 is coming out for just current-gen titles, Series S, X, PC, and PS5, I'm stoked for this one. What's kind of a bummer is that the game is currently in a concept phase, meaning it's not going to be done for pretty much a long while. We do know that Remedy has their plate full because they are working on Alan Wake 2, which I'm so excited for. And they're remaking Max Payne's 1 and 2. So that's kind of a wild thing to look at. I have reached out at various times to have people from Remedy on the show before, to no avail, unfortunately. But I feel like that would be one of those dream gets, would be to sit down and talk to the people that are making some of those games. There's just so many cool moments of level design, of art, of writing, which is just incredible. My mind is blanking on the lead writer, who I want to say Sam Winter. He's like the face of Max Payne, and he's worked on Alan Wake and everything. But I can't remember the name off the top of my head. Nonetheless, it would be so cool to have them on. What's interesting to me is that Remedy shared that over 3 million copies of Control have been sold since launch, and that feels way too small a number for a Game of the Year contender, a Game of the Year winner in some cases, a game that's cross-gen and really puts on display a lot of what the current gen systems has to offer. If you're among those few, or those many, I guess you would say, who have not played Control, I strongly recommend checking it out. Really, really good time. Really neat concepts and whatnot. It's weird. It's fun. You're kind of a Jedi at various points. Definitely give Control a look if you have not, because I really enjoy that one. And I think it's deserving of more players to be checking it out, particularly in a world where people love superhero games, myself included. This is a great superhero game. It just hasn't happened to be branded DC or Marvel. So take that for what you will. Battlefield 2042. Battlefield 2042. It's the first person shooter, of course, in the Battlefield franchise. And you can tell I'm reading a copy on that one. It's been announced that season 3 of the game is going to be coming to EA Play, which of course means Game Pass subscribers will also get to play the game for free. So if you have not played Battlefield, or you've been sitting on it because of all the broken launches, and they really have been working hard to fix that game, that's coming to Game Pass for season 3. And I think that's a worthy entry into Game Pass. November 22nd, Game Pass subscribers, check out Battlefield. Let me know if it's any good. I think it's a real shame that it's coming out right around the winter update for Halo, the Warzone 2 launch, the Modern Warfare 2's arrival in general. There's a lot of love in the first-person shooter space. Kind of a bummer that 2042 is, I think, going to get drowned out by that. I would have waited 2 weeks, kind of first week of December, but maybe they know something I don't. Nonetheless, Battlefield 2042, a lot of fixes happening in there. If you're going to play it, do check it out and let me know how it goes, because I can't see myself tearing away from Modern Warfare 2, Warzone 2, or the Halo Infinite Winter update, which I have not yet checked out, but has gone live. I know my buddy Ains over at Season Gaming is loving it. I've seen a lot of really good press and really good like user vibes on this one. It's like a 10 gig download, but it introduces Forge, and a lot of people are really stoked about Forge because it is basically the culmination of what the Slipstream engine can do. We're seeing a lot of maps get remade, a lot of content be produced here. And if I had to guess, Forge is going to be what kicks this game back on the map. I personally have no interest in designing anything in a video game. I don't enjoy level designing stuff. I had my brief stint with Disney Infinity making levels. That was really fun. But Forge is not for me in terms of creation. But if people are creating things that others are enjoying playing, and it's getting spotlights and you're seeing articles written about it, that brings about attention to a really great gameplay experience. They also added campaign co-op to this one, and I think that's amazing. I can't wait for when Joe, Kevin, Suddy, myself, Charles, whoever it is, jump in and play campaign co-op. I think that's going to be a really good time. 4-player Halo action in Halo Infinite's world. I'm in for that one for sure. Like, I really want to play Halo Infinite co-op, but it's going to be when we're ready, because I've already had that experience and I did it on the hardest difficulties, etc. So that's kind of cool. But there new maps in this update, a free 30-tier battle pass. That's good. We'll see if this really is going to get us ready for season 3. I hope people are excited about Halo Infinite again, because the gameplay is sublime. The problem is right now my attention's on Modern Warfare 2 and not going anywhere. I'm really enjoying that experience. I'm hot garbage at Modern Warfare 2 now. I used to be like a plus 2.0 KDA on any given map, any given time in Modern Warfare 2 back in the day, 10, 15 years ago. Now I'm like, woo, I made 1.0. But I don't care. I'm having a blast with it. It's really, really good. A lot of cool stuff in there. So that's what's up on that front. Quick talk about Gears. Gears of War had its 16th anniversary this past week. Amazing. And celebrating that occasion, where it was an announcement that Netflix is partnering with the coalition to adapt the games into live action films, or a live action film, which I would have to guess becomes a series, right? They're also making an adult-themed animated series, so you have to think like Cyberpunk Edge Runners, that kind of thing. That's awesome. That's awesome. Gears of War is ripe for the rated R treatment. Absolutely deserving of an animated series. I think people are really going to get into that. The live action one, a lot of people are sending out their dream casts on this. They're sending out their dream casting options on this one. Who they want to see play, what characters, whether or not Dave Bautista is going to be in the movie. I'm not sure Bautista is really the right choice for Marcus Phoenix. As much as I love him and his enthusiasm for the brand, I'm not sure he gets it. I don't know. I can't tell on that one. But I do know that there are two options for Baird that I think would be amazing. And one of them was suggested by the internet. The other one was me. A lot of people suggesting that The Rock should be Marcus and Baird should be played by Ryan Reynolds because they have such good chemistry. If like Red Notice, they have partnerships with Netflix, and The Rock brings in people. He'd be a good, big muscly guy. And Ryan Reynolds is hilarious. So why wouldn't you? And I think that's a great choice. I love that option. I love the idea of Anthony Starr, the guy who played Homelander, to be Baird. I think that would be a really good foil to whoever they pick to be like the big, tough, brooding guy. And I think a lot of times these ensemble casts that require like quiet archetype heroes, they need the right people around them. And I think Anthony Starr would deliver that one. So that's my choice for playing Baird. I don't have a strong thought on any of the other cast members right now or any of that stuff. I'm really just curious to see what Netflix is going to do. Are we going to get a Resident Evil situation? Are we going to get a Cyberpunk Edge Runner situation? Where are you landing in this one? And I saw people debating like the proper director for this one, and somebody said Zack Snyder, which is right up my alley, right? Like, 'cause I'm a diehard Snyder fan. I would actually say that's a perfect fit because of how dark and brooding things are in the two universes. It actually makes perfect sense, joking aside. So like maybe, you never know. But I'm excited to see Gears getting some love. I love Gears of War myself. I once had an incredible Gears of War collection that I had to sell off to make ends meet at one point. And since rebuilding kind of various gaming collector pieces, I've not rebuilt my Gears collection. I haven't been able to do it. And so I still have the books and the comic books over on my shelf. I'm still looking at the Gears retrospective, which is pretty darn cool. Like I have a dream interview with Cliff Bleszinski. Like I have it. I have a dream to interview Cliff Bleszinski, which is, I have his new book, Control Freak, over on the shelf, which I'm anxious to read this holiday. Gears is special, man. Gears is special. And so cheers to that. I did want to comment on something that I saw, or I've been seeing a lot of people discuss over on the old interwebs there in the social media spaces as Twitter burns to the ground. And that's God of War and Xbox players enjoying God of War. And I got to tell you, God of War Ragnarok, fantastic game so far. I'm a couple hours in, really enjoying it on my PS5. I got the collector's edition with Mjolnir's hammer. I'm absolutely loving this game. And it's very apparent from the moment you boot the game up that Xbox does not have a single title on the level of God of War in terms of what they're going for with presentation, third-person narrative, storytelling, writing. There's nothing in Xbox's pantheon that compares. That's not to say that Xbox or PlayStation makes better games than the other. It's a matter of, I think, direction and audience. You look at the top games for Xbox right now: Sea of Thieves, Forza Horizon, Halo Infinite. These are the top games on the Xbox side. Microsoft Flight Simulator. And none of them are going for that third-person story-based narrative. Now, it's a matter of what your preference is. In truth, I love Halo Infinite, love Sea of Thieves. I've got, days and days of time in these games. Sea of Thieves, I think I'm at 1,000 hours now. Halo Infinite, several hundred, or a couple hundred, I think. Maybe that's too much, but a lot, right? And I love the Halo series, the Halo as a franchise, thousands upon thousands of hours. I really love those, but none of them do what God of War does because they're not trying to do what God of War does. And it makes me really frustrated because I boot up my PS5 for the first time in a while. I start God of War, and the first thing I think to myself is, man, I wish Xbox would do this. Man, I wish Xbox had this. And I look at what's on the horizon for Microsoft, and I don't see any games like this. I see Redfall, I see Starfield, I see Avowed, perhaps Perfect Dark, perhaps State of Decay 3, but none of them are trying to do what Ragnarok does, what Insomniac Spider-Man does, what Ghost of Tsushima does. And it kind of bums me out. I want that third person single-player, narrative-driven experience that oozes quality from the moment you boot it up. I get that with a lot of Sony first-party things. I don't get that from Microsoft's first-party things. Again, a matter of direction. This is apples and oranges comparisons, but it does make me think about, imagine if we got this experience with a Microsoft IP. And I really do dig that concept and that idea. I mean, there are moments of writing in Halo Infinite that really stand out. There are moments of beauty in Sea of Thieves that are just awe-inspiring with those sunsets in the water, and there are really cool hellacious experiences with Forza Horizon, but I don't think they are meant to be compared to something like God of War, Ghost of Tsushima, etc. But I would like to see Xbox explore this realm a bit more. Hellblade 2 has the potential to be this, and I hope it is. I think some people wanted the Rise franchise to do that. I would love to see not a Crackdown in that realm. I would just love to see maybe a single player Gears of War experience that's based in this, where you're not Marcus Phoenix, but you are a guy or girl kind of in that Gears world, threats of the Locust coming up after you as your solo endeavor trying to get through everything. That'd be a really cool experience. You got climbing elements. I saw glimpses of it in Hivebusters. If they took away the brosif the brosif, I guess you would say, team co-op moments of Gears, and you had a single player experience, I think you could do a lot with that. But yeah, I think it's pretty cool. I'll note that God of War Ragnarok feels like more God of War at this early stage I'm playing in. It doesn't feel like it's doing anything new yet, and still okay with that. Still loving that. I mean, if I got more of my favorite games and I'm getting more of one of my favorite games with God of War, that's great. I just haven't felt like there's anything that's doing a big thing. So a lot of people are asking me about like game of the year. I don't know yet. Not there. Love and Vampire Survivors. That's an incredible game. Check it out on Game Pass, by the way. It's on console as well. The game of the year conversation that's going to come down to Elden Ring and God of War, I think is going to be, at least based on right now, probably going to be like, do you want a gameplay experience? Do you want a narrative experience? And they're both fantastic. And so, cheers to that. I don't really get into the game of the year conversation as much as I used to. I think last year I really bowed out of it, and I really just don't care anymore. I'm really more like, hey, I love playing great games. I don't care what your game of the year is. I don't like when one means the other isn't as good. And I guess that's just not where I'm at in life right now. But I know Elden Ring gave me some of the best gaming experiences this year. God of War is looking like it's going to be giving me some of the best gaming experiences. I'm loving Vampire Survivors. I just 1K'd Gotham Knights, which is a blast. Certainly a flawed game in many ways, but I'm really enjoying that. It's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy. All right, let's get to a few elements of listener mail. I'm rocking and rolling today, really just trying to enjoy talking to you guys, rocking and rolling here. And then we're going to talk to Colin Moriarty, which I know is going to be an interesting one for many of you. All right. First question this week comes from Anubis. He says, what is your hype level for Somerville? Anubis, right now it's at 0. Really and truly haven't thought about Somerville not once. At the moment, I'm looking forward to Evil West. Like I said, I'm playing my way through God of War. I'm playing my way through Vampire Survivors. I just finished Gotham Knights, rather. I'm really anxious and keen to check out Sonic Frontiers when it goes on sale. I think that game, with a few patches, probably is going to be really great. Really looking forward to that one. And my mind is on Callisto Protocol as well for this year. So Evil West is kind of my big one, and then Callisto Protocol, Sonic Frontiers, and I haven't really thought about many other games at the moment. I'm kind of short-term focused, and Somerville never really spoke to me. So at the moment, 0. But I mean, are you stoked for it? Let me know about that one. And more curiously, should I reach out to the Somerville people? Like, are they somebody you'd like to have on the show? Because if so, I will take the time and reach out to them. Absolutely. All right, next question, a bit of a somber one, comes from Famous Seamus. He says, in honor of Kevin Conroy, what were your favorite? See, I got emotional. Kevin Conroy just passed away this past week, if anybody did not know, and he voiced Batman in the animated series, as well as a number of games and animated films. He also made a live-action appearance, I think, in one of the CW shows. I'm pretty sure it was Batwoman, but I think it was like a big crossover thing. Nonetheless, he says, and this is Famous Seamus, he says, in honor of Kevin Conroy, what were your favorite moments from the Batman Arkham series? Oh man, my favorite moments from the Batman Arkham series. Well, the Arkham series, Origins, Asylum, City, and Night. That's my favorite game series of all time, and Arkham Knight is my favorite game of all time. And Really been enjoying kind of retrospective thoughts on that series of late. I think Batman's a character that's defined by his villains, and so from the very first moment in Arkham Asylum, when Batman is taking Joker in, seemingly voluntarily on Joker's part, there's a special moment of interaction between Conroy's Batman and Mark Hamill's Joker that really lets you know you're in for a new gaming experience. Arkham Asylum is what brought superhero games into, perhaps the mainstream isn't the right word, but really that top tier level of gameplay that Gotham or Arkham Asylum is what allowed us to get to Spider-Man, right? So it's pretty darn cool to have those moments. And I think about when he brought Joker in, I think about the Killer Croc fight from the first movie, or from the first game rather, when in Arkham City, when you're exposed to the city for the first time and suddenly you realize just how many Easter eggs are littered throughout, how many different areas there are, the dynamic conversations that are taking place about the Batman and him hunting everyone. I remember playing Arkham City for the first time using DLC costumes. Playing as Batman Beyond was really cool. And then all the different like Scarecrow missions where you're in the fear world, where you're exposed to toxin gas. It was just wild. I really love the boss fights from the Arkham Origin series, and Arkham Knight, man, there's so many great moments in Arkham Knight that occur dynamically because of the world and the way they choose to tell the story. There are so many villains in Arkham Knight that you can experience Batman's interactions with, and the way they incorporate the Joker into Arkham Knight is really special as well because he's dead. So when I think about all the great Arkham series moments, and I think about Kevin Conroy's experiences with them, it's interesting because I think of all the villains and all the performances of the villains, but never once do I think about Conroy's portrayal of Batman because it's such a staple, badass, capable hero and voice to match it that it's never interrupting my moments. I'm never thinking, oh, that didn't sound right, that doesn't match. I'm like, no, this is Batman. Kevin Conroy's voice is Batman in these games and in this universe, and it's incredible when you handle the Joker, when you face down Scarecrow, when you battle Ra's al Ghul. All the performances that Conroy gives just nail it. You're always Batman, and it's really, really neat to have it. So yeah, I think about just what Kevin Conroy did for Bat fans and people like me who, I mean, I'm sitting in the Secret Labs Batman chair. I'm looking over at my shelf and I've got every statue now. My collection has grown, by the way. This is really cool. I've got Arkham Knight, Asylum, and City statues from the collector's editions. I finally got those. I just need to get Origins. Kevin Conroy's Batman brought that character to life, and it's really cool. It's really, really neat. And I'm sad that he's gone, but happy to have so many great memories with him in different universes and whatnot. So yeah, that's, I guess, my thoughts more expanded on Kevin Conroy. All right. Last question comes from Mr. Hypecaster. He says, doing his standard Antonio Guillen thing, he says, an old lady heads into a local electronics boutique. She's trying to reconnect with her teenage grandchild who likes anime, video games, and recreational marijuana. She's asked you, the store employee, on a 5-minute lunch break, which game box do I buy for Timmy? What do you say? If grandma's in there and Timmy doesn't have a gaming box just yet, I say get a Series S. Get Timmy the Series S, get him Game Pass, and let him check out some stuff there. He's going to get to play a ton of hit titles in Xbox's Pantheon. He's going to get a chance to play a lot of top tier AAA titles, some of which I've mentioned on this episode, and he's got access to the entire EA Play lineup. So whether it's racing games of Xbox, racing games of EA, whether it's action games across Xbox and EA, he's going to have them all. And if he really digs it, he can also play those things with his subscription over on the cloud or his PC. So that's what you get him for the variety. Absolutely. If he likes the Fortnites, if he likes the Calls of Duty, they are all there and going nowhere. So that's what I would say. Get the gaming box, Xbox Series S. That's what you get for little Timmy. If little Timmy was not little and he was in his mid-20s, I'd say buy your own gaming box. Stop making your grandma smoke weed to be cool with you. All right. That's going to be it from my side of the show. Before I head you over to listen to Colin Moriarty's interview, I think it's really neat that Colin was willing to come on. I think a lot of people know Colin Moriarty from his IGN days, beyond, from Kind of Funny, and more specifically, leaving Kind of Funny and the split there in order to create Last Stand Media. A controversial figure, sure. A lot of people have a lot of opinions about him. But I would remind you that Colin was willing to come on the show and discuss his role at Lillimo Games. That's what we talked about. We didn't talk about a lot of the other stuff because I think there are other people that are interested in that. And this show is about discussing development with developers. And so Colin talked about being a creative lead, talked about being a writer, being a co-owner of a company, and what they do specifically to make Lillimo titles. And that to me was my favorite part about this. I learned a lot about how being denied from getting into Game Pass can give you insight into how games are published on the different platforms. I think that's really interesting. If you're unfamiliar with Lillimo Games, think TwinBreaker, Perils of Baking, Habroxia is 1 and 2, which is what I love. I love Habroxia is 1 and 2. 1K'd both of them. You should absolutely check those games out. Enjoy the interview for that. Really, really listen. And if you're a fan of Last Stand Media and you're listening to this one, I have to say I really enjoyed my time listening to Colin. I've enjoyed his interactions with Ainsley Bowden over on Seasoned Gaming. I would hope to see him on something like the Trophy Room, a PlayStation podcast. It'd be really cool. So I really enjoyed this interview. It was insightful for a lot of reasons, and Colin spoke to me with a ton of respect and kindness, and was willing to come on and talk about his roles. I think that was a great thing. So I hope you guys enjoy the interview. Get back at me on Twitter at Insipid Ghost if there is somebody that you would like to have on the show from the development side of things. Please check out the YouTube shorts over on the YouTube side of things. And of course, if you're listening to this podcast, it's available on all the other podcast services as well. That's it from me. Enjoy the interview. Take care. Well, today we are fortunate now to welcome writer, co-owner, and creative lead for Lillimo Games, Mr. Colin Moriarty. Colin, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm ecstatic to have you. I think a lot of people probably know you, if they're my age, from the IGN days, perhaps from Kind of Funny or Last Stand Media. But today we're talking about Lillimo, which you co-own and you're the creative lead for. Tell me about where that came from.
Yeah, so Lillimo was founded by my partner and majority owner, Barry Johnson. And that was his first game came out, in 2019, I want to say. Was it 2019, 18, 19? No, it might have been 2018, actually, the original Perils of Baking. Mm-hmm. And he had happened to just be a listener of mine, and might still be, probably not, because we know each other now, so it's probably awkward to just be listening to these random podcasts where I go on and on and on. But when I left Kind of Funny and started Sacred Symbols and Last Stand, the opportunity had presented itself to collaborate with him on a game potentially having to do with the show Sacred Symbols, and we released that game, TwinBreaker. But that's basically how I came to be subsumed by this company, because basically we worked together, and I ended up acquiring 49% of the company after TwinBreaker came out. So yeah, that's how it kind of just, it sounds lame, but it kind of fell in my lap, and I wanted to take advantage of it because I think Barry's great. And I think I love arcade games and 2D games, and we have a real spirit for that. That's all we want to make. So I think I have like a bedfellow with him, and yeah, we're making it work. So it's been fun.
That's really fascinating and interesting. I'm curious though how TwinBreaker comes about prior to you working with Lillimo. Like what was it that pushed you towards making TwinBreaker or crafting that narrative?
Yeah. So when the original Perils came out, which I had nothing to do with, we like the game, but it's a very crude game that Barry made. It's on PS4 and a couple of other platforms, and he sent it to me, and I gave him feedback on it. And then Habroxia, I want to say, came out. I think that's the order. And when Habroxia came out the next year, he sent that to me, and I could tell that there was a major jump in quality and his abilities and all of the rest. And it was really interesting. And so I was giving him more feedback. I think we talked about Habroxia on Sacred Symbols, which was cool. And then Barry basically came up to me and asked if, maybe I would write something or we can collaborate when we were talking, going back and forth on that. And so we had this original idea, which the demo still exists for. We've talked to our audience about it. We were working on, we wanted to make a brawler, and like a Double Dragon style game, and we were going to call it Please Protect Chris, and base it on our co-host Chris Raygun on Sacred Symbols, and basically like how like just a day in his life trying to get to the show recording and all the things he has to do, and it would just be like this ridiculous concept. And we were kind of going down that road, and then for a little while, and then Barry had presented to me, knowing that I have a real affinity for brick breakers, which I do. I love brick breakers. And he presented me with this idea he had, and a demo of TwinBreaker, what would become TwinBreaker, with multiple paddles and all of the rest. And so I'm like, let's do this, and we can make this into our game and put me and Chris in that case into the pilot seats of these two ships, and I can write this story, and it would be this really, so TwinBreaker ended up being this really funny game in the sense that we wanted to make it as dramatic and ridiculous as possible. I gave it this insane story, and then it's just a brick breaker. So, but it has like all this really intense narrative and dialogue and all the rest. So that's how that game came about. And then it was just really supposed to be a one-off thing, and then we ended up kind of merging together into a hive mind, Barry and I, and so that we've gone forward together for 2+ years in that regard.
So when he comes to you with the idea of TwinBreaker, or showing you that, then you're thinking you can do more with it. Habroxia had already been out. Do I have my timeline right?
Yeah, it goes Perils, and then Habroxia 1, and then TwinBreaker, then Habroxia 2, and then Super Perils of Baking. So, so Habroxia was already out, and I had nothing to do with the original Habroxia.
I see. Okay.
With Habroxia 2, my task was to kind of start to retcon the original Habroxia into something more, into something understandable. So what we ended up doing with that was, the pilot in the first game is lost, and his daughter is looking for him in the second one, Sabrina, which is this character we made. And so, we want to continue to do more with Habroxia. We're working on a couple of Habroxia projects. We think we might want to maybe remake the original Habroxia, which we already did with Perils of Baking, but we're very schizophrenic with the things we try to do. So we really need to figure out our next path. There are multiple options for us.
Well, for listeners, my introduction to Lillimo Games specifically came by way of Habroxia's both 1 and 2. I found this shmup, checked it out, and then I was like, oh, I love this gameplay. And then Habroxia 2, and really enjoyed my time with it. And I could tell that there was a significant, it's very obvious, of course, there's a significant amount of writing in Habroxia 2 that kind of paves the way to tell a more complete story. And so you've got more in the works for that. Is it a franchise? Would you think of it as a franchise at this point?
Yeah, I think we could. We're tiny, so it's funny to say, yeah, it's an IP, I suppose. Yeah, it was funny because when I wrote TwinBreaker, I wrote it, there's a ton of writing in that game, but the idea was it was supposed to be ridiculous how much writing was in it. It was supposed to kind of be ironic in the sense, like, I like the story. I think it's fun. It's this futuristic story about war and space travel and all the rest, but I put a ton of narrative in it because I wanted it to be really unbalanced in the sense that you don't really, I love Arkanoid, Breakout, Magic Orbs, like all these games in the past, they didn't try to tell you anything. So I just thought it would be funny to do that. And then so when we put Habroxia 2 out, I'm like, all right, I'm going to pare the story back significantly, and we'll tell the story through an intro and an ending, a secret ending. And then I actually tried to tell the story through the descriptions of the different planets that you would go to, or the different places in the system that you go to. But when we released the game, one of the major complaints about it, and I felt bad about this, was like, where's the writing? Like, where's the story? And I'm like, I'm trying to make it more in the spirit of what the game was supposed to be at the time. And so we kind of, it's ironic, I guess, in that I put myself in a corner where people wanted more story. So we actually patched it, and I put a bunch more story into Habroxia 2 based on user requests. So that's where like Sabrina's journal comes from and all the rest. And
So that means what I played was not actually the released version, and the story was added to it post-launch?
The intro was there. So the intro sequence was there. All the interstitials were there, and like the planet, like the names of the creatures or the robots that you fight, the names of the planets with the descriptions, that was all there. But the main journal entries that you get after each stage that add like a shit ton of story, pardon my language, to the game was written and patched in. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So this brings up this idea of scope, I suppose, because Lillimo seems to do a lot of, I would call it retro aesthetic, right? There's things that obviously the old systems couldn't do.
That's all we want to do, by the way. So.
Okay. Let's touch on that then. Why? How come? Like, what's the reason for that?
I just think that 2D games are special, and I understand why we're getting more and more away from them. And I also understand that there are really big, very talented developers that do make 2D games, such as Yacht Club and Way Forward. We're not on those guys' levels at all. But when I look at a lot of games with the spirit of 2D, what you notice, and I'll bring up like Bloodstain, Ritual of the Night, or Mega Man 11. They're 2.5D. They're ugly. And I hate to say that, but it's just 2.5D is a cop-out. And we don't want to take the spirit of it and then just give you this Unity aesthetic, or this like Unreal 3.x aesthetic where it looks like Shadow Complex or something. Now, I love Shadow Complex, but look at the game and then look at Symphony of the Night, right? Look at Castlevania 3, then look at Ocarina of Time, and
fundamentally different.
Right. One still holds up aesthetically. I still think Castlevania 2 and 3 are some of the scariest games ever made. Atmospheric games, and they're NES games. And so we want to be able to contribute to that as much as we can. So Barry and I are in total lockstep. Like, we have no interest in, you will never see, I don't want to say never. I don't even know where we would begin making a 3D game. We have no idea how to make them. We don't use an engine that can make them. And we just have a real passion for pixel art. And I just think pixel art is the most beautiful thing. And you see a game like Shovel Knight, or you see the Bloodstained spin-off games that are predicated on Castlevania 3. They're gorgeous. They're absolutely stunning. Or you look at that Mina or Mir the Wanderer game that's coming out from Yacht Club next year. It's like, man, that's where we want to be. So more power to 2.5D if that's what you like. More power to 3D if that's what you want to do. I love 3D games. It's just that 2.5D is trying to have your cake and eat it too, and I just won't have it because it's pretty ugly most of the time. It's such a shame that Iga didn't just take the extra time and spend the extra money with a studio like Innie Creates that already makes 2D sprite-based games like Mega Man 9 and 10 and made Ritual of the Night like Symphony of the Night in pure pixel art. The reason they don't do it is because it's hard and it's expensive. But we want to be able to contribute to that in some meaningful way, so hopefully we can continue to do that.
Do you think that pixel art allows the player, if they're interested or inclined, to imagine that world better? Is that perhaps why you find some of those NES games to be as scary as they are versus some of the games that can be far more graphic in these modern times with blood and gore and atmosphere? Do you think that's why people are able to do it? Is their imagination?
I think so. I think that's one of the things that makes video games special. Like, I loved Resident Evil 8. I thought it was awesome. And but when you play a game like that, it doesn't leave anything to the imagination, and that's totally fine. I think that's totally fine. Everything you see is the world you're in. It's all beautifully rendered. It's atmospheric and ambient. There's voice acting and there's sound effects and walking through the snow and opening doors. And it's all there. And that's awesome. It's an experiential thing. But I do think that part of what games can leverage is not the reality, but the assumed reality of a situation, that you're seeing it through a perspective. Like when I play a Japanese role-playing game, and I go to a town and I can talk to 17 different people and go into 6 different buildings, I know that there are not only 6 different buildings and 17 people in the town. That can't be. They're like those old videos and people would write these articles about like how many people are actually in Final Fantasy VI. And then you would go around and count. And it's like the world's population is 212 or something. It's like, it's supposed to be an avatar for reality. And if we understand that through that lens, then we can, and in a Japanese role-playing game, for instance, when you're on the world map, you're not really on a world map. You're traveling to and fro and encountering enemies and experiencing things. And we get that using your imagination. So I think you're right on. I think there's a place for both things, but I just think it's lame that we don't explore the former more, since that's where games came from by the very nature of what they are and the way they were created back in the day.
All right, so Colin, you mentioned a moment ago that pixel art is more expensive than certain elements of 3D rendering, and I'm fascinated by this idea. Did you know that going into like your role with Lillimo, or was that something you discovered? Because I feel like I'm discovering it right now.
Yeah, I knew that for a while. It wasn't always obvious, and it wasn't always true. So when you look at the transition from 2D to 3D in the early to mid 90s, so when you see the jump to N64 and Saturn and all of those consoles, those games were substantially more expensive. A game like Final Fantasy VII, which was released in 97 and entered development in 94, 95, cost $50 million at the time with its marketing budget. And that was considered outrageous. And there was probably 100 people or so working on the game, which was a huge team. Final Fantasy IV, created in 1989, 1990, it was created in something like 16 months with 10 people or something. So everything changed. But then it changed back, because what ended up happening was, it's not that it's like a lost art, but first of all, people started learning 3D modeling. My brother experiences this. My older brother, Dagan, is an animator, and he's a traditional animator, which is like a dying art. And he works at Nickelodeon now. And he'll always lament that he feels like he should, and he's almost 50 now, but he laments that he should just disappear for a year, learn Maya and all these other things that would be necessary for him to learn, and then come back as a 3D animator, because so many people are doing it now. But the reality is that making 3D worlds, rendering in 3D, is very difficult, but it can be assisted by many different things, which don't exist per se in the world of pixel art. So you can have middleware and a bunch of tool sets that help you animate fluidly and do all these things in your engine. You create, one model, and you can move it around and create frames. And so I'm no animator, I'm no artist, and I'm not saying it's easy, because you look at a game like The Last of Us Part 2 or Horizon Forbidden West or something like that, and you're like, Jesus Christ, this is absolutely insane. And it's really expensive. These are $200 million games that are developed for 5 years at a time. And so what I'm saying is that it's not that there's no skill or a lack of skill in that space. Of course not. It's just that everyone's focus is in that space. Everyone's time is spent in that space. All of the tools are made to make that space easier and more hospitable for people to be in. And the more that happens, the more pixel art becomes a lost art, because it's hard to convince someone to say, like, I look at a game like Symphony of the Night as being, came out in 1997 on PS1, as being a seminal pixel art game. Look at it. I mean, look at it. It's insane. But the reality is that all of those enemies had to be animated by hand, right? Like frame by frame. All of the flicker of the light is actually pixels over other pixels. You know what I mean? The Alucard's amazing slide back is a series of hand-drawn animations, and using pixel art and putting that all together. And it's not to say that that's not tool assisted or aided either, although it really wasn't at that time, but it's just to say that it's a more difficult and arduous process. So when I see a game like Shovel Knight, and then I see a game like Horizon Forbidden West, I'm like, these are two games that look amazing and are at the very top of their respective fields, or I shouldn't say fields, their respective mediums, let's say. And I just have more of an interest in creating the latter, because I just feel like it's a connection to where games came from when I started playing games, and ultimately what I look for most in games. If you honest to God came to me and said, like, you can either play in 2D or you can play in 3D, and there's really no going back, I would choose 2D.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I see. Well, can you talk to me a bit about, or rather, I'd like to talk about kind of this concept of scope in game creation. I think we've heard a lot about it of late, as studios are bought and sold, games are canceled and rekindled. But to enter into game creation, what does the word scope mean to you as far as coming to a project?
Yeah, I think the scope of the project is, and by the way, the scope of every project is always huge at the beginning. But the scope of a project is like what it aims to do and what it intends to do, not just in terms of length and staying power, but in terms of demand on the player. What is the scope a single player campaign of 14 levels plus a multiplayer suite? Is it just a multiplayer map with battle royale mechanics? Is it, so that's kind of how I understand it and how we've always used it. And the reality is, and you always hear this, I always think of Uncharted specifically, where Uncharted 2, and this happens all the time, Uncharted 2 is really the realization of what they had kind of intended to do in the scope of the first one. They just had to start cutting and pairing because there's not enough time, and things go by the wayside and all the rest. We're kind of dealing though with this notion at our end too. Like I like this term weekend game that I came up with. This idea of, we're not going to compete with people, generally speaking, that are putting, like God of War is coming out now, Tactics Ogre, all these games I'm really looking forward to. And we're not going to compete with those games. Those games require a shit ton of time and more money and a lot of time as currency from the player. And so how can we fit in? And I always said, like, let's make games that people can download on a Friday and finish on a Sunday, and feel good about having spent $10 on it. And we're not we can release anytime because we're not demanding too much of them, and we're not trying to compete by putting up, by scoping 25-hour campaigns and doing all these things. So with the role-playing game we're making, we're going to go much bigger for the first time. But generally speaking, I think that we want to make, and in fact, one of the Habroxia projects we're thinking of, which would be a prequel to Habroxia, would be even smaller, and maybe even more bite-sized, and we'll explore how that goes as well, because there's a lot of different things we want to explore, as far as, like, we can get the best data for ourselves by trying these games and selling them and just seeing what happens. So
for listeners, I want to just give you guys an idea of what he means in weekend game as well. I've put about 12 and a half hours into Habroxia 2 with over 1,200 achievement points, and that's been an absolute blast. I've enjoyed every moment of it. Done new game plus.
Awesome.
I still can't beat boss rush mode even on the basic level.
Yeah, it's tough, man. I mean, we often find that the games are harder than we think.
That's okay. So that's interesting. I'm gonna ask you about that in a moment, but I wanted listeners to get an idea of what you mean in that weekend game is truly, like, it's quick and digestible. I'm curious though, and I'm thinking with this question, the jump between Habroxia 1 to Habroxia 2, and how the lessons of the first game impact the scope of the second game. You've talked about the writing, but what about, like, the amount of enemies, the level design, any of that kind of stuff? I mean, reusing assets and enemies is something that you guys did in ways with Habroxia's 1 to 2, and sometimes that gets what's the polite way to say it, mixed up in the conversation. These very silly people saying, like, God of War is reusing animations and whatnot. Like, shut up, like, that seems so silly to me. But what's the right way to take lessons from one game to the next while maintaining your scope on where you're going?
Well, I think what's funny about reusing assets is, my favorite series of all time is the classic Mega Man games. And those games all reuse assets from one to the next. And each game introduces assets and retires assets, of course, with enemies. And obviously the bosses are a big part of it. But what's cool about that is that actually it could be looked at as lazy, and probably is one of those things where you can be like, well, we can take a third of our enemy slate we've already programmed and made the art for them. We can literally just drop them into the new game package, and it'll work exactly the way we want to. So there's something obviously shortcutish about that, and that's smart, but there's also something that binds it all together. It's like, why would Dr. Wily make all new enemies or new robots over and over again? Wouldn't he have robots that he would always rely upon? And so he would have the Matul hard hats and all these different things. And so when we were looking at Habroxia 2, we thought the same thing. We're like, well, we're dealing with the same enemies, so why would they, and we're going to their home system now in Habroxia 2, so why would they have just different stuff there? They have some different stuff, probably newer stuff, better stuff, maybe stuff that would solidify and protect their home system better, but of course they're going to have a lot of things that they fought in the first game with as well. And so that just made a lot of sense to us. I think what's funny about the God of War stuff, and this was a thing with Horizon 2, was the reuse of animations. I remember people were upset Aloy was, like, using the same rope animations and all this. And in my mind, I was just thinking, wouldn't she do it the same way? I mean, if Kratos has this way that he and the boy put the boat in and out of the water, wouldn't they just do it that way over and over again? Yes, they are reusing old animations, but this is very old too. You can find plenty of videos, and this was done in the traditional days of Disney movies, just overlaid over each other, overlaid, stealing animations from one Disney movie to the next. Have you seen these videos?
I have, yeah. Mickey Mouse walking is suddenly a different character walking. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And it's because they look at it and they're like, well, the kinetic energy in that animation is done and it works. We can just draw over it, and that's a shortcut, but it also makes sense because it's what we often say about Call of Duty on our show Sacred Symbols, which is the shooting, in my opinion, is so good in that I feel like there's no shame in replicating it and keeping it. And so if you find in Horizon that this is the perfect looking tree, it's like, well, I don't need you to necessarily model another tree if that's the perfect looking tree. You understand what I'm saying? It's just, I feel like people need to look at it more as a world building thing too, even though it is used as a shortcut, of course. But you should want your developers to take shortcuts so they can spend their time on new things. And So anyway, I'm going on.
No, you're not. That's why you're here. That's the whole point of having this interview, man. Do you think that in the idea of taking assets and lessons from games 1 to 2, players want to keep that sense of continuity into your next Habroxia projects, which I'm thrilled to find out are coming?
Yeah, I would assume that if you care about Habroxia, then you would want some sort of connective tissue, and things can change. So we're talking about Mega Man, for instance. In Mega Man 2, they introduced the items, which in Mega Man 3 becomes Rush and all the different Rush mechanics. And they also introduced the slide. And then in Mega Man 4, they keep the slide, they keep Rush, and they add the power shot, you know? So I think like that kind of approach would make a lot of sense for us. And we're thinking about going in two different ways with Habroxia. We have an idea for, like I said, a Habroxia prequel, which I think would be a smaller game. And I have a really a central idea of what I want, what I think that can be. And Barry is already working on scoping, specking that out for us. And then a Habroxia 3 would go in the opposite direction, which I think would be an even grander version of Habroxia 2. And
I see. So it's scaled project between the sequential order.
Right. So think about Mega Man 1 had 6 robot bosses and then like 3 stages before you fought Wily. And then Mega Man 2 had 8 robot masters and it was like 4 Wily stages. And then Mega Man 3 had 8 robot masters and then you go back to 4 of those stages and then you go to Wily's castle. And then Mega Man 4 had 8 robot masters and Dr. Cossack's castle and then Dr. Wily's castle. You know what I mean? You just you continue to build on that. It reminds me a little bit of Mario 3 to Super Mario World as well, where they're really the same, but one is just much bigger than the other. They're both great though. And so, yeah, I think that would make a lot of sense for us with Habroxia, a Habroxia 3 or a Habroxia prequel. And we're interested in staying in that space just because it's popular. It's compared to Super Perils of Baking, it seems like a direction worth going into for us.
You mentioned difficulty earlier, and I wonder if you couldn't expand upon that, because I am, especially as I get older, less and less good at games. That's a terrible
me too.
But I struggle more and more with the quick reactions and whatnot, and patience, I suppose, as well. As you guys develop a game and you're kind of crafting both a narrative and a gameplay experience, difficulty for your player base has to become a factor for development. How do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that we have opened up the game to be played, the next game and the next game and the next game and so on, to be played by many more people than we used to. And I think that that's been really important, because I think we found with TwinBreaker especially that it was just way harder than we thought. And I think that came from the fact that really only we played it. I mean, a couple other people tried it, but Barry and I were the ones who played TwinBreaker. And so when you play it over and over and over and over and over again, you just become really good at it. And then when we released it, in my opinion, I was like, this game's kind of easy, but I hope people see it for what it is. And then we're getting feedback going, Jesus Christ.
You said that about Mega Man back in the day, and even with the collections, I'm still getting crushed.
Yeah, I think it's, you just got to be in that mode.
Yeah,
I think I'm just very much a 2D gamer. Like, I remember when Shovel Knight came out and people were really struggling with that. And I remember in my review at IGN, I was like, if anything, it's too easy. But then I play a 3D game and I get smashed, so I'm not saying that because I agree with you. I've totally atrophied. My skills have atrophied as well. But difficulty is a really important thing for us to keep in mind, simply through that TwinBreaker experience, which we learned something about our game that we didn't really know. And we learned other things too, like that people really don't like RNG, which I get, but we had a trophy attached to RNG, which people didn't really like, but we had just assumed over time you would get it, and that proved to be true, but maybe a lesson to be learned there. And so we with Habroxia, it's funny because we took the lesson so seriously from TwinBreaker that Habroxia 2 is really as easy or as hard as you want it to be. That's why I'm surprised, not so much with Boss Rush and like New Game Plus, but when people say like, I'm really struggling getting through Habroxia 2, I'm like, I don't understand how that's possible, because we made it so that you can make your ship so strong that it's ridiculous how strong your ship can be. And we did that, and we did it in such a way where you can buy and then sell any of your power-ups to basically make a customized difficulty bar. That way, no one would really, not no one, but we would mitigate complaints about the game just being too hard for people, because that was always our reaction was, okay, TwinBreaker is a lot about it's a little bit about RNG, but a lot about movement, and some people just can't play it, and that's totally fine. But with this game, if you just grind out credits on the same stage, which sucks, I guess, but if you're really having trouble, just grind credits out and make your ship insane, and then just beat the game. I mean, what's the big deal, you know?
Yeah.
So we might have even overcompensated in some way, but I think it was a really effective thing. I think modular difficulty, I think, is kind of a nice idea, and it was the first time I ever saw that was actually in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, when they were like, here you can set the difficulty with your puzzles, you can set the difficulty with your combat, you can set the difficulty, and I was like, that's pretty cool. So we tried to do the same thing. So like, do you want your ship to have a ton of guns or none? Do you want your ship to have a lot of speed? Do you want your ship to, you know, kind of a similar mode? And I think we helped. I think that helped a great deal. But I also think with Super Perils of Baking, which was the game after that, that we just let a lot of people play it, and we were not so precious with it this time around, and we're going to continue to not be so precious moving forward.
Gotcha. That's interesting. Game Positive wrote in when he found out we were talking, and he asks about the story of Habroxia 2. He says, as with many a shmup, it's told in relatively short bursts, and in many cases, smaller word counts can typically mean each individual word becomes more meaningful. As a writer, do you find that as a blessing or a curse to create characters or a story within those confines?
Yeah, it's funny because I mean, I'm incredibly verbose, as I think people know, and that listen to me and read my old work and all of that. I just think that brevity, there's a place for brevity, but I don't think it's a podcast. I don't think it's the written word. I think it's, you know, in small talk or whatever. And so I did take seriously with TwinBreaker. I feel like the irony of TwinBreaker was lost on a lot of people, and that's a failure of the writing. So I don't blame that on anyone. I wanted people to turn that game on and be like, why the fuck is there so much writing in a brick breaker? This is, I'm sorry, I'm cursing.
You're fine. You're fine.
Why are there so many in this brick breaker? This is completely insane and funny that this is happening. It's a cool story. It's really interesting. It's really grounded, but it's so bizarre. Instead, what people thought, some people thought was like, well, is this guy for real? You know, do we need a 4-minute intro to TwinBreaker? And I'm like, well, okay, I guess that's just me failing then. And so, like I said earlier, the second time through, it was like I wanted to be more judicious and economic with the word usage to fit more in what I expected people would want from a game like that. And like I said, it was funny to see that it wasn't enough. Like we did the intro sequences, and then we did that conversation with Sabrina and her dad, which is basically the training mission that I wrote that you can also skip. But other than that, we just kind of tried to leave it up to people's imaginations. And the way I tried to write it, and I'm trying to look at video to see if I can find it, is what I tried to do. Yeah, here it is just to tell a story through little blurbs. So the first stage in Habroxia 2 is the circumstellar disk. And then all it says is a mining operation bordering the alien system. And that's all it says. And then at the end, you fight an enemy, and it's the mining robot. And what I was trying to do was to say, like, okay, you're approaching this enemy system looking for your father. This is like their home planet. So they're their home system. So they have all of their economy and social stuff and everything going on here. So at the very outskirts, you encounter a mining operation, like a mining op, and fight a mining robot. And I'm like, that's the story, right? And then you move on, and you get to the halls of power and like closer to the home planet and all these different things. And that's what I was trying to convey. But like I said, people were like, well, we liked the writing in TwinBreaker. And I'm like, are you kidding me? People were complaining about the writing in TwinBreaker, and no, we liked it. So then I went in and wrote all the journal entries, which I felt like weren't really necessary, but that a lot of people really liked, that gave you more of Sabrina's point of view, who is not supposed to be so much of a seen and heard from character as much as just the avatar for the player. So the reality is that this it's kind of a blessing and a curse. We've long now lived in the period of endless patching. We can patch our game every day if we want to for free. We can do whatever we want to the game. And there's just no final decision. Nothing actually has to be final. And it's the blessing because we were able to add something that people wanted, but it was also a curse because I wasn't able to really execute on what I wanted it to be. But again, it was a failure in writing because people didn't see it for what it was again, and I guess that's my fault.
Do you think it's a failure in writing, really? Or do you think it's just a massive audience and people are bound to misinterpret or interpret things differently?
Yeah, I mean, it could be that. Maybe I'm being too hard on myself, but it's like I watch people play games and just hit the X button as they try to get through story or whatever. I was like, all right, move on. And I think we got a lot of people just play games like that. So when you're trying to put a soul into a game, basically, you have to kind of connect only with the players that understand that it's there at all, if that makes sense. And so I think you're right, but I wish that the very act, like I loved this thing. I'm just watching a video of it. And of when you would fight the bosses in the game and their names appear, but then it also says like what they are. Right. And I was hoping that would just be enough to goad people into kind of using their imaginations, I guess, a little bit. You know, you're in the mine. Now you're fighting Sif, the guardian of the ore. So just use your imagination. I mean, but then I had to write a journal entry afterwards to talk about it or whatever. And it's like, okay, I can do that. But how much? My brother always says it's very Spielbergian when people put a little bow on everything like that. And it's like, don't you? My brother always says, like, no, don't you get it? No, don't you really get it? I'm going to put it right in front of you and I'm going to reiterate it. We're going to have a character proxy for the audience in there and all. It's like, it's too heavy handed, but I'm still learning how to do it. So I'm proud of the writing. I don't want to get that wrong. I don't think the writing's bad. I think the writing's actually really good. I just think people have to see it through the lens of the intent.
That makes sense. No, it makes perfect sense. Colin, Lillimo has a splash screen that pops up at the beginning of its games, thanking the player for spending money on that game. And I can think of only a few titles that have done this. I can think of like Witcher 3 did it in their box back in the day when they first launched in physical form. Can you talk to me about that decision and that splash screen?
Yeah, that was my idea. And I felt like it's not something a lot of people even bring up. I just feel like it's important to acknowledge the player and thank them for the buy-in, especially because what's a good example? Like my sister is an art teacher, but she has like this pretty thriving jewelry business on the side. And she goes to like these fairs and all these things and sells online or whatever. And she gets to interface with her customer. So when someone buys a pair of like custom earrings from her, they're like, thank you, Allie, for these custom earrings. And, oh, you're very welcome. And you exchange the money and it's very physical. And maybe there's like a rapport there. And we don't have that option, really. So it's good to just tip your cap and be like, thank you, especially in an era. And we're very open about this on Sacred Symbols and certainly feel like this at Lillimo, is just games are too cheap and people don't understand the economics of video games at all. I mean, it's actually stunning how ignorant even people that play lots of video games are about how expensive they are to make and how everyone has the right to do with what they will with their dollar. And I think that's totally fine. But as a player of games myself, I go out of my way to buy games. I try to buy them I try to buy them at full price if I know I'm going to like them, or I just like the developer, or I like the publisher, and I just try to show that respect. And so in an era, again, when we've had a race to the bottom, eliminate value in games where people expect things to be free or on cheap subscription models or whatever the case might be, I think it's really vital to say, hey, thanks for spending $10, because we know a lot of people aren't spending $10 and we can't do this without your $10. So here's a tip of the cap.
That leads me into, first of all, I love the idea behind that because I'm a teacher myself and this is my side hustle. So I get it.
Yeah, right on.
I'm curious, you guys published, and you have a strong relationship with PlayStation just based on your own background, but you publish games now on PlayStation, excuse me, on Switch and on Xbox. Can you discuss the differences that you see in getting a game to those various first-party platforms?
Yeah, so I can give you a little bit of insight. We have an associate producer, Ben Smith, who is also the associate producer of my company, Last Stand, and he does most of the interfacing with the different developers, or I'm sorry, the different stakeholders rather, because they all have their own ingestion systems and all of the rest. Generally speaking, and I think a lot of people feel this way today, is that Xbox is the easiest company to work with and seems to value your specific games the most. And why we feel this way is because Microsoft has gone to much further extents than certainly Sony and Nintendo, to not flood their storefront with garbage, just abject garbage. And just that alone, that discoverability on Xbox, it's easier for a player to stumble upon our game there. And it also feels like Microsoft understands history better than its competitors, in the sense that it doesn't seem like it wants to shut anything off or take anything away. While I think Sony has shown a propensity to say, like, we want to shut PS. I mean, remember, they were ready to shut PS3 and Vita down completely until people freaked out.
Yeah.
You think they don't want to do that still? They're waiting, and they're going to try again. And that sucks, because it doesn't mean you don't have access to the games you bought and stuff. I feel like that's perpetual, but it just means that a person who released a game on PS3, like a random game like Retrograde or something, like that game can't even be bought anymore. There's no commerce there anymore. It's done. There's no chance for someone to, if they're like a PewDiePie type person coming along and streaming it one day in 20 years, and people be like, what is this game? And they go back to the PlayStation Network archives and they find this old game. Well, that's not going to be possible for PS3 probably. But Microsoft has a much better eye on that. They've always had a better eye on that. And with people putting games up and then leaving them there inertially to just do what they do, discoverability is everything. And so we think Microsoft is the best to work with right now. But we sell the most copies on PlayStation because there are the most players there for our particular types of games. I think Sacred Symbols audience is there, and that's a built-in marketing arm for us. And I also I'm of the mind too that I just think Xbox is training its players not to really buy games. So it's kind of it's ironic in the sense that I'm using that word a lot today, but it's in the sense that it's the best place to be because our games feel safest there. But we wonder if the curation of that that platform into subscription model only with a la carte options that no one's really taking advantage of, that might actually be the death knell of our ability to do business there. So as usual, we are all over the map. I will say that the most heavy-handed is PlayStation. We had to remove a reference in Super Perils of Baking to Taiwan to get the game on. I wrote an enemy compendium, and in the enemy compendium, it's a game all about a baker, so it's all a cookbook. And so it's like all the steps to build the different enemies. And there's like an evil toaster enemy. And so I talked about how it was made in a Chinese factory or something for $1 a day, and then I wrote just Taiwan as a country, and we would have failed certification if we didn't remove that.
Sony would have failed you on certification,
right? Exactly.
But Microsoft and perhaps Nintendo.
Microsoft doesn't care. Nintendo didn't care either. So actually, the game is patched on PlayStation and unpatched in that regard on Xbox and Switch right now, and PC.
That's interesting. We okay, so you brought up several aspects that I'd like to ask you about within that, but I don't want to forget listeners. Ronald Reagan and Fenrir asked about your insight regarding subscription services, which you kind of briefly touched on. Could you? And one of them suggested that you had attempted to get some of the Lillimo projects onto Game Pass. Is that true, or is that just kind of an offhand?
No, that's true. We tried to. Well, not all of them. We tried to get Super Perils of Baking, which is our newest game, on Game Pass. We pitched it to them. We're kind of bummed because, I mean, it's up to them to not have the game. They didn't want it, which is totally fine. But we had originally wanted to release the game on 420, which I think would have been funny because it's about eating and about baking. And
on the date 420. I got you. Okay.
Right. And we had to delay it.
What?
No. And we had to delay it. I'm sorry, because we had to wait to hear back from them. And they ended up turning us down. They turned most games down. I don't really blame them. I don't know that Super Perils of Baking would have been a great project for them to have promoted. It's not a Tunic or something like that, but it's funny because I think it's our best game. I think it's clearly our best game, actually, but it didn't sell very well. So we could have used that subscription money. But I think what we were most curious about is we have this theory, which a lot of developers do. I don't care what anyone says. It's just I talk to a lot of people. It's just that the subscription models are really bad news. And we wanted to understand better because everyone's so NDA'd. I talk to people and I know what some people have been paid and all this, but no one's allowed to share that theoretically. And we wanted to just have firsthand data on like, well, how does this work? Maybe I have this real feeling that the subscription models are going to erode our ability and many developers' ability to make money. The only way to get primary data on that is to enter one of our games itself. So we tried to do that to just see, because maybe we're totally wrong. Maybe this works out great, and maybe we're not seeing the forest for the trees. But unfortunately, we were not able to get that data, so we sold a la carte instead, which is totally fine. We were going to do that either way, obviously. But I think being on Game Pass, we would have been precluded from releasing on PlayStation for a little while and all the rest. So we just had to wait on all of that. But we
Did they give you reasons why you're not selected?
I don't know. I don't know if they did. Barry and Ben were dealing a lot with that. They might. That's actually a good question. Because we corresponded with them back and forth, and we're like, no, you guys are in the queue, and we're taking a look at the game. So they are doing some sort of examination of it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't. We're a small indie studio. The game, I think Super Perils of Baking looks great, and I think it's really fun. I think it's a great homage to Super Mario World, but it is certainly not Kenna Bridge of Spirits or one of these PS Plus games or one of these, everybody or Nobody Saves the World or whatever, like
Sure.
a Drinkbox game, where it's like that's a very high tier, expertly made indie game that this isn't for sure. We are a much different operation. We would have liked to know more information, but yeah, we are skeptical of subscription models. I am extremely skeptical of subscription models and the race to the bottom in the games industry. I just think the math doesn't really make any sense. And I hope I'm wrong, but I just feel like it means more games, more churn of content, and just a lot of just random nonsense to just justify people's subscriptions. And my whole take is I would rather pay $70 for a great game a few times a year. I don't need a subscription. I don't have PlayStation Plus, those tiers either, those new tiers, because I'm just like, I literally have PlayStation Plus to use cloud saves. And otherwise, yeah, we're skeptical, but we would like our own primary data so we can make a more informed decision.
Do you think that, I mean, obviously if you're able to afford your games, there's an element of privilege in that, like, we're able to buy our games and some people aren't, but the ability for a developer to make money is crucial to more games being made. And that presents a unique conundrum. You need more players in your ecosystem, but you also have to intake money, and that means games will be designed differently, if I'm correct. Right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting. You bring up something that I think it's hard to talk about, but it's true, which is gaming. You don't have a right to play video games, right? Like there's no God-given right to have access to the greatest video games in the world. Like, just like with anything else, there's a level of entry to that. That's just the way it is. It's the way it's always been. It's the same for a film. You don't just have a right to walk into a movie theater because a film is released. You don't. Like, you have to pay for a ticket. And so I think this mentality of people being like, well, gaming is too expensive and it's out of reach or whatever. And I'm like, but that's just totally divorced from reality. Gaming is cheaper than it's ever been, and more people play video games than ever. So
there's a bit of irony that many people play those games on $1,000 phones.
That's exactly right. Well, that's hysterical. And but what's also true, and I think this is something Sean Layden used to talk about, and it's something that is looked at as widely true, which is there seems to perhaps be a finite amount of core console / PC style gamers. That number might be something like 250 million. And that number just stays the same. And people come and people go, and some people stay. And there's this argument that number never really grows. And the idea of having these other models, whether it's free to play or subscription, cheaper access, is just to court all of the other people. But my argument is that you can just make great games and people will flock to them. And you see that with PlayStation this year. Gran Turismo 7, Horizon Forbidden West, MLB The Show, not counting the Xbox sales explicitly, and certainly God of War, are all going to be in the top 10 best-selling games in the United States. Those are not seen anywhere on subscription models. So I feel like it's whether you want to marinate your games within this 250 million static person group, or you want to try to expand the field. And I still think there's a lot of blood to get from that 250 million stone, I don't think you have to abandon the mores and norms of our industry to get more people in. I think if anything, we should be trying to inform players that games cost a lot of money to make, and that people don't make a lot of money making games usually, and that we have to look at it as as a transaction, just like you would go to a store and buy your food or whatever. I mean, I just don't understand what people don't get about that. And the reality of Lillimo, I mean, since we're talking about Lillimo, is I don't get paid. You know, like,
I didn't know that.
If I got paid, we would not exist. Like, I do all my stuff for Lillimo for free. I don't need the money because I run Last Stand and it's very successful and I'm very lucky. But Lillimo would not exist if we had to pay me, just like we pay Barry or whatever, you know? We've made like a fundamental, almost unheard of sacrifice to even keep going. So imagine what's going on with the indie studios that don't have the biggest PlayStation podcast in the world as a built-in marketing arm, or like an ex-IGN editor telling people to go play a game. When I tell people that games sometimes sell scores or hundreds of copies on PlayStation Network, I mean it. And I don't think people really internalize that, and maybe you should.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
You said a few minutes ago, kind of, you're breaking down the differences between the first party platforms, and being that Last Stand does have such a PlayStation reach, you're able to sell over there, but you get better visuals, or you're seen and discovered more easily on the Xbox side of things. What's the difference between the two on that front? Like, what is Xbox doing that PlayStation's not? You mentioned curation on some level, I think.
Yeah, curation, I think, is a big thing. This is where some people get the idea, and I totally get it, where Game Pass acts as a curation device. My whole thing is just that you shouldn't have to pay for that. That should just be part and parcel of using a platform. They shouldn't be pointing you towards the good games. You should just know where to find them, and there should be some sort of immersive way to go through a product and just have a better understanding of things. Which is why I think that both Xbox and PlayStation have a lot to learn from Steam, if anyone, about game pages and user reviews and telemetry. But I think I was at IGN when PS3 was turning into PS4 and Vita was out there. And PlayStation had their real indie initiative thing going on. And this was born out of the reality that they were very, very late to the game in competing with Xbox Live Arcade, which was, in the Xbox 360 era, really renowned for bringing $15 or $20 games to huge audiences. And games like Shadow Complex remain one of my very favorite games of all time. And Sony, on the other hand, was doing things like Playdead actually presented Limbo to them first. And they said, yeah, we'll take it, but we want to own the IP. And they're like, there's just no way we're doing that. So they went to Microsoft, and it became really associated with Xbox Live Arcade instead. And Sony kept making these mistakes over and over again. And so eventually they were like, we need to court indies with no strings attached. So this is where the pub fund came from, which doesn't exist anymore. But this was the idea that Sony would actually lend people money. So this is how Drinkbox got started, and a few others. They would basically fund Guacamelee and games like that. And then the sales of the game would pay them back with a small rip. And then once you're free and clear, then you just split the money 70-30 like usual. And this allowed a lot of indies to get a footing on PS3, late PS3 into Vita, PS4, especially using Unity engine and all these other things. And then by the time PS4 rolled around, it just had a ton of indie support, and it was known for that. And I think about games like Mercenary Kings and others early on, where I'm like, these games were awesome. And Sony at some point, I think, started looking at the numbers and saying, we don't need to make hundreds of thousands of dollars in profit or several millions of dollars in profit. It makes no sense. Instead, we're going to make these massive AAA games, and we're just going to extract much more value out of them. And I totally understand that approach, but I think they have to understand that if you're going to let everyone sell on your platform, then you should at least acknowledge that they exist and give them the best possible experience, one that is consistent. And I think if you talk to a lot of indie developers like I do, and I know a lot of these people, they would say that PlayStation was a great place to be 8 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago, and not so much now. I mean, not unless you're Stray, not unless you're Kenna Bridge of Spirits, not unless you're one of these games. Otherwise, you have no prayer of being seen or being heard, because there's going to be, Jumping Taco, 7 iterations of that, and there's going to be all this crap. Where on PlayStation, I was pivotal. PSN Profiles is a website for trophies, and I was pivotal in getting them to change their structure so that all of the shovelware that's uploaded to PlayStation Network basically every day would be funneled out in an attempt to basically injure those companies financially. At least that was my intent. And so it's a mess. And I think that Microsoft has in turn captured or recaptured the spirit that they had during the Xbox 360 era. And dare I say, even in the late Xbox era, people might forget the original Xbox, like the Xbox Arcade, were discs, and you would put them into your Xbox and buy games off of them.
Mm-hmm.
And they were always kind of ahead of the game in services. And so I know that that's why people look at accoutrements like Game Pass and are like, well, this is so obvious. And I'm like, yeah, there might be something there. I mean, look at achievements and the Ethernet cable and Xbox Live and all these things. Certainly they were ahead of the game there. But what's interesting about Microsoft is that they're recapturing that independent spirit while Sony seems to be clueless. And they think that promoting a game like Hades is promoting an indie game. And I'm like, but Hades isn't an indie game. I mean, it's an indie game, literally. You know what else is literally an indie game? Hitman 3. You know what else is literally an indie game? Cyberpunk. But I think we know what it means to be indie.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not 25-person teams and $10 million budgets and all the rest, and they've lost sight of that. So when I see these things where they put up the best indie games to keep an eye on this quarter or whatever on PlayStation Blog, I'm like, these are not indie games. Indie games are made by studios like Lillimo.
Mm-hmm.
Go find the next game. Don't tell us about the games that we know about already. This is a fundamental failure Sony has not recovered from, and it's why we don't feel very confident about the future of doing business there unless they take a real left turn, because it just seems like it's going to be dominated by whatever they want it to be dominated by. And while they have while it's a closed garden and they have the right to do that, it just doesn't seem fair or equitable to flood the PlayStation Network index and make it so that games can't be found. And I'm positive I'm not the only developer that feels like this. I know it. I speak to people about this all the time. It's people are really, no one's ever going to abandon ship with PlayStation. That's not going to happen. But people know that they have lost touch for sure.
Is this a lot of times on social media platforms, people will attribute this to Jim Ryan or Phil Spencer or Sean Layden or the top brass type guy. Is this that happening, or is this more of just kind of a spread out problem amongst Sony, or a benefit on Xbox, or a loss on Xbox in different elements?
Well, some executive did make the decision that, some executive in the C-suite or someone trusted by them at Sony made the decision, we're going to make the PlayStation Network a free-for-all. And I actually crunched the numbers and don't even understand how they make money on this, because these games have to have managers and they have to go through certification and get their trophies uploaded and all of this. And they went from a PSN. I tell newer gamers that weren't on PSN during the PS3 era, especially, I'm like, open up your mind to the idea that there were weeks where games didn't even come out. Nothing came out. And like, I remember, even if you go further back, like on GameCube, there would be like 5 months with no games. Over the summer, people were gone. You didn't download stuff. And I feel like the less is more mentality was eroded mostly by Apple, which, and though I target Microsoft with their Game Pass stuff, it's really Apple that deserves the ire of everybody, because they really dropped the bottom out with the App Store and the free-to-play stuff, where it's just, you can't even sell anything there anymore. It's just, no one wants to pay anything. That's you training your audience to do a certain thing. And
that's your fear with Xbox.
Right, exactly. And so Xbox wants to train people not to buy games. They don't care. But I don't understand how that really works. If you're going to have a subscription model and then you're also going to pay a la carte stuff, it's just, that's again why I wanted the data, because we wanted to basically compare, and we would have to keep it to ourselves, but I wanted to compare the gross sum of money we would have been paid, plus if there was any residual, I don't know, and then how much we might have sold on the platform, but also like opportunity cost, which I feel like is just not really taken into account with the subscription models. In other words, if you train an entire ecosystem to not buy games, what makes anyone want to sell games there when they're not on the service? It's and we just don't have the raw data. Microsoft always releases this just ham-fisted data. Like, these guys spend 11% more on games. Like, whatever, dude. Just use the numbers. Like, what are the numbers? And if you don't share the numbers, I suspect they're not worth sharing.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's just obvious. Who used to, in the Xbox 360 days, who used to say every single month how many consoles they sold?
Microsoft.
Yes. And then when did that stop? In the Xbox One era, right? Now we have no idea anymore. I'm pretty sure Microsoft hasn't released official sales data in like 8 years.
It's been a
on
long
actual
time.
console sales, like hard console sales. As far as I know, no one really even knows how many consoles Xbox One sold. You know?
Yeah, I think it was like last we heard was a little over 40, and that was projections, not
Right,
official.
exactly. Like there's no hard and fast number. Like we know exactly how many PS4s were sold. And what's ironic is we also know exactly how many PS3s were sold. But I'm not trying to pick on Microsoft. I'm just saying that they are very precious with that data. So we need to kind of delve in and kind of extrapolate ourselves. But if they had good things to say, they'd say them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like when we see PlayStation Plus's collapse in subscriptions, which I believe, I think the new PlayStation Plus is not worth it. I told people not to get it. I was so mad when people were stacking it up sight unseen for years. I'm like, what are you doing? You're just giving Sony money for no reason. And lo and behold, it's not very remarkable. But I wouldn't be surprised if Game Pass also has fallen in subscription numbers too.
Really? I would be surprised if it has fallen. I would expect it's going up. Let me rephrase that. I expect it to go up in 2023.
I do too. I expect that people like what it's what I do with, like, I just canceled Hulu because I'm like, well, I don't need this right now, you know? And even though I can afford it, it's like, well, it's just like, why would I give money away? And I feel like people are doing that with Game Pass because I don't think they're not going to be back. And I think the number will be higher year over year. But I think there's a softness right now. There has to be. What are the games, you know? And so I just, again, it's all conjecture until we get actual data. But I'm very interested in this data as a developer because it has everything to do with the economics of our studio and how we will exist moving forward. We have to understand the lay of the land in order to move forward, and people should want the most even playing field possible for quality to shine through, and that should be the only barrier to entry. So Microsoft seems to appreciate that better than others, which is notable and something that we have noticed.
So let's wrap this up on that point, Colin. Garrett Bland wrote in. He wants to know what's next or what's going on with your next project. He knows you're working on the story for it. You talked about Habroxia. You briefly mentioned an RPG. What's next in terms of Lillimo and the projects you're working on, and do you still see those being multi-platform?
Yeah, we'll always do multi-platform games. We have no interest in doing console exclusives. The only reason that TwinBreaker came to PlayStation 4 and Vita first was because it was a Sacred Symbols game. We had always intended on bringing it elsewhere. We just wanted to have a little celebration for the PlayStation audience at first, and so that's what we did. But the future, well, we have a lot of irons in the fire right now. The reality is that we have somewhat of an urgency to create more revenue because it's just Super Perils didn't sell very well. I don't know what the sales are at. It's probably like 6,000 or 7,000 copies, something like that, which is just not good for us.
What would be good? I'm asking out of ignorance. I truly don't know.
Yeah, I think that I think 10,000 in the first month would have been ideal. Like our TwinBreaker sold very strong. Habroxia 2 sold really strong. So yeah, just, I don't know, something like that. But what was disappointing about it was it's real. I know people would expect me to say this, but it's really good. And I thought it would have more of an appeal. I wrote a story for it that's it's like written in verse, and it's for children, basically. So I just we were trying to do something different. It didn't really work out, but it was cool because it was a remake of our original game that I had nothing to do with. So I got to kind of put my mitts onto that. But yeah, we have a couple. Let me even just open up our Discord. We have a different channel for our internal Discord for every game that we could potentially be doing. So let's see. I won't read them all, obviously, but yeah. So we call the prequel version of Habroxia 0. I don't know if what's gonna happen with that, but that seems likely to come out in 2023. And then Habroxia 3, I think, is further off. We have a game that we've codenamed, and we've talked about this a lot, called Forest Guardian. That's pretty far along, and the problem is that the artist we're working on with it has a real job, and so it's worked on pretty slowly. But that game will probably be ready at some point. And then the other two games that we're working on right now, we have the role-playing game going. That's deep in development. I wrote that. I basically wrote the synopsis and the characters, and then we had a writer, John O'Peck, come and flesh it out for us. And I'm really, really excited about it. It's a 16-bit style, Japanese style role-playing game, and made very much in the vein of Final Fantasy VI. And it's the topic, the people are going to like it. The story is very Colin, and people will see when the time comes. I don't want to ruin it. And then one other thing is that we're actually working on a pitch for a publisher. We are potentially working on an IP for a smaller publisher, but we are in the pitch stage with that. So, and that's coming more out of. I'm sorry.
Publish? I don't know what that means. Does that mean you would publish, or you are going to a publisher?
No, we're going to a publisher. So
I see.
We self-publish our games. The games we actually didn't self-publish all of the ports of some of our older games, and we actually went back and bought all of those ports. So we own everything we've made. And so the way we look at it with this particular pitch is that we need to manufacture some money. We might as well try to approach a publisher, which we did, and they were interested in talking to us, and see if we can work on their behalf to maybe raise some revenue while we get our own games spinning up again. Because again, it's just money's at a premium. We obviously we pay all of our freelancers and our collaborators fairly, and we want to just make sure everything's kind of buttoned up there. So the long-term game for us is the role-playing game, but we kind of have to get there. I think the role-playing game is going to be really big. Like I have a good feeling about it from in the indie space. I don't think it's going to be like, 100,000 seller or anything, but I think it's going to do I think it's going to draw people's attention. The subject matter is dope, I think. And we're really excited about that as well. So I would expect to see, I would expect the next game is maybe something like the Habroxia prequel would be what would be next for us.
Mm-hmm. And that would be 2023.
Yeah. 2023. And then I would expect the role-playing game, maybe late 2023, early 2024. And yeah, we'll go from there. We'll see what happens.
Well, if I can point any of our listeners today, but from this interview or otherwise, check out Habroxia's 1 and 2. I absolutely love them. Super Perils of Baking is on my hard drive. I'm excited to check that one out, Colin. I really appreciate you taking the time today, man. This is really, really great.
Cool, man. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the invite. Glad to be here. Hope Barry thinks I did a good job too. And we appreciate the support. Anyone that's interested in indie development and you want to check out our games, we do really appreciate it. Every sale helps, and telling friends and let's plays and all the rest. It's hard to get noticed. I mean, the beauty of the internet is that anyone can do anything, and that was the reason how I became big in this space to begin with, and I'm thankful for that. But it's a grind, dude. A lot of it is just luck and timing. It's all it is. I mean, you can put out a good product, but you gotta have good luck. You gotta have good timing, and nothing else will do. So it's really about repetition and learning more as we go. And we hope to continue to, I want that. I would like more money. I always like more money. That's great, but I don't need it. Last Stand is very successful. And so just having a passion project where we can try to find that next core of a great product is exciting, that we have that room to stretch. And so I'm grateful for it.
Well, Colin Moriarty, I would invite you to plug any of the socials you'd like, Last Stand, Lillimo, whatever you would have people go to check out your work, man.
Yeah, you can just Google Lillimo Games and it will bring you to our website. I think it's lillimogames.com. And I don't really use social media very much anymore, but you can find all of my coverage stuff on Last Stand on Patreon. And you don't have to be a patron. It's just the best index of all of our stuff. So patreon.com/laststandmedia.